Hi, Lorian. Welcome back. We're still in module one here, putting some finishing touches on this module actually, as we dive into the all important topic of communication and alignment of values to make sure that we're really working well with our communities. It looks like the first part of this is understanding what we're communicating and kind of aligning expectations into agreements rather than just operating on assumptions and that assuming that everyone knows how they're supposed to operate a little bit more. um, can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've seen over and over again as people launch their micro schools and they start communicating with the people that they hope to have as families in their micro schools. You can get in a situation where you think that you are being clear about your expectations and what you offer, but you may not be communicating it as clearly as you think you are. And so it's so important to not only have clarity for yourself about who you are and what you offer and what the expectations are around participating in your micro school, but then to make sure that you're communicating those things clearly and even checking in with the people you're communicating with to see what their understanding of that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's a critical distinction operating based on um, one-way communication versus two-way communication, right? Well, I told you this, but is that how they understood it, right?
Yes.
So a couple different kind of best practices or tools for making sure that we're communicating with the members of our micro school and their families are like putting together a parent handbook so that parents know what to expect. Maybe doing a parent open house or family events before enrollment begins. Uh, Putting together your school calendar early in the year and sharing that with families right up front.
And
Um,
I think it's okay to not know all the things
right.
at the outset. Don't let that paralyze you. There's a lot of great tools out there that are adaptive as you move through the year. So I make my Google Calendar uh, for my school year. I use Google Documents for communicating with parents so that there's a possibility for me to update things. And if you do that, if you're using an adaptive tool like Google Docs, just make sure that you send out communication when you update things or make a note. This document was last updated on this month, this year, so that people know they're reading the most current information.
Yeah, absolutely. And then establishing norms for communication so that the families in your micro school know what to expect. If we have to make a change, when am I going to communicate that that change has been made? M- You know, running a micro school, you don't always have the same level of administrative resources that you might otherwise have. When family emergencies come up, you may find yourself in a situation where school gets canceled on a very short term. What is the expectation for how you're going to communicate that? Have you established that baseline so that your families know to expect that kind of communication, right? Like there are some things that a text message may not be the best way to communicate it unless you have established this expectation or reached an agreement that that is how communications are going to be handled. Another important piece of this is establishing communications, like what's your availability for being communicated with.
So important.
When you're running a micro school, parents have questions at all hours of the day and night. Do you want that text message at 11:30 at night? um, do you want it to question to be addressed to you in a text message, in an email? Would you rather have an in-person conversation? And so just establishing those baselines of how to communicate with me, when I'm available, both to receive and to respond to communications. And if you try to be professional about it, be responsive, respond quickly, ideally within 24 hours, unless there's some alternative expectation in place, families are going to be pretty understanding about whatever norms you put in place.
And I think it's really helpful to talk with your families about the need for downtime, particularly, I'm a sole operator. So it's just me and my micro school, and I'm everything from the administrative staff to the janitorial staff. And I need to have time in which I'm not operating my micro school. So I'm really clear with my parents that after 8, I'm just not available. And I'm not suggesting that 8 is the right time, but that's the time that I've chosen. If you catch me before 8, you might get a response from me. If you text me after 8, I will not even read your text. You can assume that I will look at that text in the morning before micro school.
Mhm.
And that has been helpful both because my parents know what to expect. It's also helped them understand the reality of running a micro school, and it cues them into thinking about this is really different than emailing the brick and mortar school that my child may have attended before, or emailing someone who has office hours at a specific time, and kind of helps them see it from that perspective. And I think that's really helpful in just helping your parents adapt to the difference between a traditional brick and mortar school or a traditional educational environment and some of the differences in a micro school.
I think you've touched on a really important topic here. While talking about communication norms, what we've really talked about is you living your values and inviting families into your micro school who may share in these values. For me, like you mentioned, I value my family time as separate from my micro school time. So the families that I invite into my micro school, I need to make sure that they value that I have family time separate from my micro school time. So the idea here is that this is more just about the things that are going to happen in the micro school during the micro school time, but also the values that are going to be presented in my micro school are these values that the families there can support. And how do we have communications with that? How do we figure out what our values are first and foremost, and second, if the families that want to participate in our micro school, if their values line up, maybe not 100%, but in an adequate way. And what happens if we don't take some precautions? So how do you go about addressing value alignment within your micro school?
This is a great question. And it's one that I've really had an opportunity to practice over the last several years of running my micro school and having different iterations of waves of families enroll in my micro school. And one thing I've learned to really embrace is asking my families lots of questions.
Hmm.
And this is certainly a opportunity to learn about them, but it's not so much that I'm trying to interview them, but rather asking questions that will help them think about alignment.
Right.
So I ask questions like, I offer some information like, it's really important for me to have family time in the evenings. And so if you text me after 8 o'clock, I will probably not read your text and I won't see it until the morning. If you email me Friday at 8, it means that I won't look at your email until Monday morning. How will you feel
Hmm.
about that when you have something that you feel is important that you want me to know? And then we talk about that. And that gives them an opportunity to really think about not just, it's so easy to say, oh, yeah, yeah, sure, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But when you start to pose situations and ask people how they'll feel about it, it helps them internalize what that will look like in the future and really think about, is this something I'm okay with? And it's still possible that down the line, that situation may arise and they may be frustrated. But if you've done that groundwork and had that conversation, you can kind of revisit it in a way that isn't a told you so kind of a way, but
Right.
rather, let's go back to thinking, how does this feel for you? What's your experience of this? And kind of touching back in with that and helping them see that this is something they've agreed to. Um, and it's okay if they've changed their mind. It may not continue to work for them, but rather than seeing it as a failure on your part, they can see it as a mismatch of alignment. And there
Mhm.
are going to be families that you will be not in alignment with, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and I think it's actually ideal to engage in conversations in a way that this misalignment arises in conversation before it erupts in conflict, right?
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you're operating a micro school and there's a misalignment of values here, it's not necessarily just in your best interest that there be a realignment, meaning that this family has opportunities to find something that aligns with their own values better. um, but it makes it clear that this realignment is not the result of an event or some frustration or anything personal, that's not the issue here. That the issue is my micro school is going to operate in a certain way. My micro school is going to cater to a certain style of learning or focus on certain subject areas. And if that is not something that you want, my micro school is not going to try to be everything for everyone. This is how my micro school is going to operate. If you want something different, I happen to know two or three other micro school operators or even other school administrators. I'm going to be real honest. Some families, a micro school is not going to be a great fit for them. Um,
It's
and
not
it
what they're
doesn't have to
looking
be.
for.
Right. It doesn't
And
have
that's
to be. It's
okay.
fine. Right. And so being able to make recommendations to those families uh, early on, before enrollment, when you're first having conversations, but that means finding out what families actually are looking for and you understanding what you're prepared to deliver and really standing your ground on those things.
Yeah, and trusting that it will be okay to stand your ground on those things. It doesn't mean that you will keep every family that enrolls in your micro school. There will be families who down the road decide this just isn't working for me. But to trust that there will be, if you stay true to who you are and what you offer, there will be families who are looking for what you are offering.
Yeah.
And also trusting that there will be micro schools that fit those other families' needs. But there's nothing more frustrating for both parties than a misalignment in expectation. And I just talked with a parent today who has a first grader, and there was a misalignment of expectations on what would happen in a certain set of circumstances. And the parent found themselves feeling really burdened and resentful with having to run up to the school several times a week. And I don't know the full story, but I had to wonder if this parent had really been given a clear understanding of what that would look like for them. And if they had, I think one of two things is possible. They might not have enrolled in the micro school, or they may very well have continued with the enrollment, but with an understanding. I might be up there 2 to 3 times every week under these circumstances.
Hmm.
And knowing that ahead of time and having that expectation really changes how they view that, and they're opting into it. So it's less of a imposition
Yeah.
and really just part and parcel of what they're expecting.
Absolutely. My one of my children's micro school guides knows that I will make myself available to her at any moment that school is in session. That if she needs additional parental support in order to meet the needs of my child while creating a safe space for her micro school, I'm there. But it's something that is not just her expectation, and it's not something that is my assumption. It's a conversation that we had early on where we came to an agreement. So now both of us have the same aligned expectation, because we've talked about it. We know what we're going into. Um, Now, I think as a micro school operator, we might fall into the trap of, but I really need this student, right? And want to get the first students that are willing to enroll, that we too willing or too eager to accept families with the assumption that misalignments will resolve themselves down the road. I'm guessing you've had experiences where that's not the case.
100% I have. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest learning experiences was like 3 years into my micro school.
Mhm.
And I really thought I'd done my due diligence on sharing what my micro school offered and being really clear about what that would look like for this family. And our communication just didn't happen as clearly as I thought that it had. And after several months, they did end up choosing to unenroll in my micro school.
Mhm.
And it was really unfortunate in that I felt like in the end that that situation could have been avoided. And ultimately, I just was not what they were looking for. And that's okay. It's so important that as a micro school operator, um, you are willing to take everybody. You don't want to discriminate,
Right.
but you also want your clientele to be happy. And
Yeah.
if you try to be everything to everybody, it's a little bit like if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for?
Right.
Like if you try to be everything, you will be unable to enact anything. And so I really encourage people to think about that. And again, ask questions of your families. Ask them how they will feel if. Give them the information about who you are and what you offer, and explain that very real situation that you cannot be all things to everybody. And
Mhm.
so you've chosen a specific set of values or a specific set of model criteria to enact. And if that's something that they're interested in, you're excited to have them. But if it isn't, you want to help them find something that is going to most acutely align with what they're looking for.
And it's real important to keep in mind that once they do say, "Hey, this is gonna be a good fit," you've done your due diligence, you've had that conversation, they say, "Yes, this is fantastic. This is exactly the kind of learning environment we're looking for our child," that that's not the end of the communication. There's going to need to be ongoing and continuing communication, and really more of a sense of community building within the families and other community members within your micro school. And we're actually going to dive into that a little bit more in a later module, so I don't want to touch on it here. I just wanted to make sure that we addressed the point that communication does not stop at enrollment. Enrollment is not the end goal. Having a fantastic learning experience and bearing the fruit of that learning experience 10, 15, 20 years down the road, that's the end goal, right? So communication cannot stop at enrollments.
And we're going to, like you said, we're going to touch on this actually multiple times throughout these modules. So that's how important communication is. You're going to get to learn more about setting up sustainable communication systems. We're going to talk about difficult conversations and all other ways that communication comes to bear in your micro school. So we'll keep talking about this. This definitely isn't even the end of our conversation on communication.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lorian.
Thank you so much, Tom. We'll see you again next time.
Yeah, take care.